Welcome to today's episode of the Science of Behaviour. We are here to explore some truly fascinating questions about why we behave the way we do. Behaviour, it's something we see every second of every day, yet it is such a complex and layered topic. So, let's dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what really drives what we do? Why do certain people take risks while others play it safe? Why do we form habits, good and bad? It is something I have always found so interesting. But it's not just about curiosity, is it?
No, not at all. Understanding behaviour has implications far beyond just satisfying our curiosity. Think about the justice system, for instance. Understanding what shapes a person's actions can inform rehabilitation programs or even prevent certain behaviours entirely. It is foundational to how we build compassionate and functional societies.
Right? And it also helps us understand ourselves, doesn't it? Why we react to challenges the way we do, or how our choices might be influenced by things we don't even realize. Honestly, it's not just theoretical, it's practical. It's about growth, change, and accountability.
Exactly, and that's why we felt it was important to kick off this series by asking, where do our behaviours, our actions, our habits even come from? What are the key forces shaping us?
And there's so many forces too. We might look at the wiring of our brains, to the experiences that have shaped us, to the environments we are in. It is layered, it is dynamic, and it makes you want to dig deeper.
So, as we touched on earlier, there are so many factors, our brains, our experiences, our surroundings. But here is the real question. What do you think actually shapes behaviour? Just take a moment to think about your own life, or maybe the people around you.
Yeah, it could be so many things, right? Maybe it is how you were brought up. Or maybe it is the culture you are surrounded by. Sometimes it's the bigger life challenges we have faced. What stands out to you?
And it's fascinating because there's no single answer. Upbringing, culture, trauma, they all play a role, sometimes intertwining in ways we don't even recognize at first glance. It's such a rich mix of influences.
Exactly. And it's part of what makes the study of behavior so intriguing. The way all these layers interact, it is like peeling back an onion. And the deeper you go, the more you find. So, yeah, what do you think shapes yours?
It's a fascinating mix, isn't it? And when you start to unpack it, one of the most foundational influences really stands out, our upbringing. Those dynamics within a family, the early experiences we have as children, they lay such incredible groundwork for who we grow into, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you look at kids growing up in a stable, supportive home, there is usually a clear impact on their confidence and how they engage with the world. And then, on the flip side, if there's instability or tension, it's like the foundation gets shaky. It sticks with you, right?
Exactly. It's not just about what is happening on the surface either. What is fascinating is how subtle elements, like how parents communicate conflict or show affection, can influence how a child responds to relationships later in life. For instance, a child who grows up seeing arguments resolved constructively might develop healthier conflict resolution skills.
Yeah, like they're modeling what they see. And it is not just family, right? Culture and socialization play a big role too, because they kind of set the expectations for how we should behave.
Right? And culture often dictates those unspoken rules, the shoulds and shouldn'ts. For example, in some cultures, being outspoken is valued, while others might place more emphasis on humility and listening. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just what shapes us.
Yeah, and socialization adds those layers on top. Like friends, school, even sports teams. Parents might set the stage, but these other groups build the scenery. In high school, I remember how peer pressure nudged me into behaviors I would have never tried otherwise. Like, maybe a bit of mischief here and there.
There's definitely that influence. It's interesting too how life experiences, both positive and negative, also act as catalysts for behavioral development. A major life event, like a big career breakthrough, can push someone toward confidence and ambition, while setbacks or trauma can, well, let's just say they can reshape someone entirely.
Totally. It's not just about the events themselves either, is it? It's how we process them. Some people bounce back from adversity stronger, while for others, it's more like a weight they carry forward. It really depends on what supports they have to lean on.
That's where we see resilience come into play, doesn't it? Even two people with nearly identical experiences could react differently, depending on their mental framework and support systems. It really highlights how intricate all these influences are. And this brings us to the topic of antisocial behaviour. It is often misunderstood and associated with crime or overtly disruptive actions, but let's not overlook the quieter underlying aspects. Sometimes it ties directly back to those gaps in resilience we just talked about. A lack of positive reinforcement during key developmental stages, or deeper impacts stemming from trauma.
Yeah. You see, trauma is a big one here, isn't it? It does not just stay in the past. It shapes how someone reacts to the world. And I think people forget that sometimes. It is not a choice to act out. It is usually a reaction to what's been experienced.
Exactly. And one of the best frameworks we have for understanding that connection is something called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACE. You might have heard of it. It looks at categories of trauma, things like neglect, abuse, or household dysfunction, and how these experiences directly tie to later outcomes, health issues, risky behaviors, even the way people form relationships.
Right? And the evidence is pretty staggering. I mean, the more adverse childhood experiences someone has, the higher the impact on their mental and physical well-being. It is almost like, well, not to oversimplify, but it's like every experience adds another layer of difficulty for them to work through.
And it's not just difficulty. Those layers actually change the way the brain processes and reacts to stimuli. For example, early trauma can dysregulate the stress response system, making someone more prone to impulsivity or even shutting down emotionally. It's fascinating but also heartbreaking to think about.
Totally. And then there is the ripple effect. How this affects decision-making and emotional control. Like, if someone experiences neglect as a kid, they might struggle with trust or making secure relationships later on. Or worse, it leads to isolation and, amplifies those antisocial tendencies we're talking about.
Right? And here's where we see how interconnected all these factors are. A child exposed to constant criticism, for instance, learns to doubt themselves, but also to anticipate rejection from others, which can make connections, even positive ones, feel unsafe. This in turn can shape behaviours that others might label difficult or antisocial.
Reminds me of this case I read about, where a kid grew up in a really chaotic home environment. He learned to basically always stay on edge, to expect the worst in people. And as an adult, he found it nearly impossible to relax in social settings. It's like his brain got wired to survive, but not thrive.
That's such a clear example of the lasting impact trauma can have. And it's also why early intervention and positive reinforcement matter so much. Shifting even one of those formative patterns can unlock resilience and change someone's trajectory entirely. Building on that idea of unlocking resilience, let's dive into the brain's remarkable ability to adapt, the concept of neuroplasticity. It's how the brain rewires itself based on experiences, and it's a key factor in how we can counteract some of the impacts of early trauma or negative experiences.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I mean, imagine that. Your brain is constantly adapting throughout your life, from learning new skills to, let's say, recovering from trauma. It's like, no matter what we go through, the brain is trying to make sense of it all and adapt. Pretty wild, isn't it?
It really is. For example, when we experience something deeply challenging, like trauma, certain parts of the brain, including the amygdala, can become hyperactive. The amygdala is central to processing fear and emotional responses, and when it's overactive, it can create patterns like hypervigilance.
Yeah, and hypervigilance isn't just feeling on edge. It actually affects daily life in ways that you might not even notice at first, like always scanning for danger or struggling to fully relax. It is like the brain is stuck in survival mode.
That is a great way to put it, survival mode. Another structure we cannot overlook is the reticular activating system, or RAS. It is the part of the brain that filters incoming information. When facing trauma or prolonged stress, the reticular activating system can amplify certain inputs so that threats, real or perceived, dominate someone's attention.
And that totally influences behavior. Like, if someone is always keyed into potential dangers, even harmless situations can feel threatening. You know, it's that constant state of fight or flight kicking in, which is exhausting and also really hard to turn off.
Precisely. And this ties directly to emotional regulation, or more accurately, the difficulty some people face in regulating emotions after trauma. When the brain wiring is altered like this, everyday interactions can trigger reactions that seem disproportionate but are, in fact, a product of those changes in the brain.
Oh, for sure. It's not just mental, it's physical too. Like, certain behaviors might look like anger, but underneath, it's frustration or fear that just builds up and spills over. It's amazing how these patterns get played out, even in things like careers or relationships.
Exactly. And that's what makes understanding these brain processes so powerful. Once we know what is driving these behaviors, from hypervigilance to a lack of emotional regulation, we can start to see the person beneath the behavior. It's a step towards compassion, isn't it?
Absolutely. And honestly, it makes you think, how much of what we see in someone's actions is actually shaped by past experiences their brain is still trying to process? It really shifts the way you look at things.
That is such an important perspective, Matthew. Seeing the person beneath the behavior really broadens how we approach things. So, a key takeaway for anyone working with clients or communities is this: understanding the impact of adverse experiences isn't just theoretical. It has real practical implications. One of the first things to consider is how trauma might manifest in behavior. Often it's subtle. Maybe it's a hesitation in decision-making or a tendency to withdraw. Recognizing these patterns is the first step.
Right. Because once you notice these, it's not about labeling someone as difficult or dismissing their reaction. It's about asking, what's behind this? That's where understanding comes in. For instance, if someone seems overly defensive, maybe it's because they've been repeatedly criticized in the past. It's layered, isn't it?
Exactly. And beyond just observation, here's a practical tip. When you notice signs that someone may have faced adversity, take a step back and ask yourself, how can I approach this interaction differently? Maybe it's by giving more reassurance or crafting a space that feels safe. Building trust is fundamental.
Yeah, trust. That's such a huge one. If someone doesn't feel safe, they are not going to open up, right? And, honestly, sometimes the smallest adjustments can make the biggest difference. Like how you phrase a question or the tone you use, it all contributes to how people respond.
And not just professionally. Think about your personal relationships as well. It is worth reflecting. How often do we respond to someone's behavior without considering their backstory? Understanding what shapes people can deepen empathy and help us navigate conflicts more effectively.
Absolutely. And here's a question for you listening right now. How can understanding these deeper factors help you? Not just in your work, but in your day-to-day life. Are there patterns you have noticed in others or even in yourself that might connect back to past experiences?
That is such a powerful reflection. It reminds us that behavior is rarely random. Even the toughest interactions often have a story behind them. By approaching those moments with patience, curiosity, and compassion, we can change the dynamic.
And not just change the dynamic, but actually make a lasting impact. Whether it is helping someone else or even just improving how we communicate, we have this opportunity to make things better with every interaction.
Building on that idea of understanding the story behind someone's behavior, let us delve a bit deeper into where these behaviors actually originate. It is fascinating when you consider the layers, how biology, our environment, and social influences intertwine to shape who we are and how we act.
Yeah, and it's not just big obvious stuff, right? Like it's those subtle things too. The way your brain processes experiences, or even the unspoken rules in your culture or family. It's all connected.
Exactly. And then there is the profound impact that trauma can have, literally reshaping the brain and how we respond to stress, relationships, and even daily challenges. It is not just something that is in the past, because its effects can carry forward in unexpected ways.
Right. Like that whole idea of the brain adapting to survive, but not always to thrive. It's fascinating and kind of heartbreaking at the same time. But here is the thing. It's also why understanding all of this is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely. When we recognize these forces, we're not just learning about behavior, we are gaining the tools to empathize and support others in ways that can truly make a difference. It shows how knowledge really can be empowering.
Yeah, it's like, with knowledge comes power. The power to understand, empathize, and actually drive change. How incredible is that?
And speaking of that power to understand and empathize, it is worth taking a moment to think about your own life. What are some behaviors you have noticed in yourself? Maybe patterns you have never really questioned before. It is all about tapping into that curiosity and uncovering the forces that are shaping who we are.
Yeah, and it does not have to be big changes, right? It could be just noticing patterns, why you react a certain way, or where some of those habits might have come from. Honestly, starting small is often the most powerful step.
Exactly, and we would love to hear from you too. Your questions, your thoughts, or even your own experiences, everything adds to this conversation. Feel free to connect with us on social media or through our platform. It's always great to keep this dialogue going.
Absolutely. And hey, make sure you tune in next time. We are going to dive into something really fascinating: trauma-informed practices. It's about understanding how trauma changes the way people interact with the world, and, honestly, it's totally reshaping how we approach behavior in so many spaces, from schools to workplaces.
It really is a transformative approach, and I think it is one of the most important topics we can delve into. But for now, thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Each time we explore these ideas together, it feels like another step toward deeper understanding and connection.
Yeah, it has been great chatting about this stuff. And honestly, I hope it sparked some new ideas, or even just a bit of curiosity for all of you listening. Until next time, take care, and as always, keep asking the big questions.
Take care, everyone. See you next time.